Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
Yeah, so I'll just insert some commentary on kind of the Twitter situation and more broadly kind of the chaos that's going on the internet right now. I mean, I am a Elon Musk and Twitter critic, and I would like to see Linda Yaccarino fix things, if that's the correct pronunciation of her surname. I would like to see her fix things. I don't think that that's going to be possible.
Yeah, how do you fix Elon Musk?
Right, exactly.
The real CEO.
Exactly. And she refers to him as the boss, apparently. So she's not, she's
with a thick accent, the boss.
Right.
Kind of
the boss.
The boss, yeah, in sort of a Godfather sort of way.
Yeah, so I'm kind of rooting for her to be able to make some positive change. It doesn't seem like she will be able to do that because of Musk's kind of meddling, if you will. And so there are all these Twitter alternatives, and there's a lot of pent up demand for an alternative. This is sort of what you were saying in a way, David. People want something else, but nothing, now that you have all these candidates, T2 and Post and Mastodon, of course, and there are a bunch of them. I mean, in some cases, like
Blue Sky.
Well, Blue Sky, right? And Blue Sky apparently saw some surge in signups after the read limitations that Musk turned on this weekend. So I'm on Blue Sky now. I just signed up for Threads, and the prospect of all these different platforms now is just totally exhausting to me. Like, there's just no way to maintain equal attention to all of them, and so you have to sort of pick a couple of them, and it's really not clear, as you were saying. Do you just sort of sit and wait and see what emerges? Do you just post the same content across all of them? It's very frustrating. They're all kind of identical Twitter clones in a certain way, and it's like starting from zero. It's like I've invested so much time in Twitter, and now to go onto Threads. I'm not a big Instagram user. I have an account, but I don't really use it that much, so I don't have a lot of followers, et cetera, et cetera. I have to, you have to build those from scratch. I mean, the point of Threads is that you don't have to do that if you're a big Instagram user. But anyway, it's a microcosm of something larger happening on the internet with, the breakdown of sort of the Reddit moderation system because of the charging for the API and other things that are going on. There's just we were talking in the green room about content moderation and the kind of chaos that's going on there. It just seems like the institutional system that governed the internet, or the homeostasis that existed, has broken down now, which on the one hand creates opportunity, but on the other hand is creating a lot of confusion, chaos, frustration, and what have you. And Mastodon, which seemed to early on be promising, I think is done as a Twitter alternative. So we'll see what happens, but it's very, I mean, you can sort of see it as exciting, but I'm exhausted by the whole thing, pretty much.
And we need a feta deck, which allows you to read and post from, that's what they're talking about with Mastodon and Threads ultimately.
Yes, right.
And Blue Sky is some sort of
right.
federated social networks where you can be seen and see, although gets very complicated in terms of finding an audience, right? I mean, my preferred use of social networks has been as a publishing platform, right? Where I share what I learn, and I only interact with 100 people or so. But I had 15 or 16 or 17,000 followers on Twitter, right? I had like 500,000 followers on Google Plus. Gee, that was the high point of my life. And they actually engaged.
Were those bots? Were those mostly bots?
I have no idea, but it was I had a very engaging worldwide audience there. I mean, I don't know how many were real, but it's like, who knows what happens at this point? It's really, it is very frustrating. And Tweetbot or whatever or what the hell is the thing? TweetDeck, which was sort of the ideal way to interact with Twitter, no longer functions correctly. They hosed that this week too. Right. So you can't easily watch multiple threads, multiple streams, multiple users. I can no longer even figure out on TweetDeck how to just see people who are reacting to me or reposting my stuff. It's like it just disappeared from TweetDeck. TweetDeck has been neutered.
Well, this is a version of a conversation that we have periodically about investing in a platform that isn't yours, right? And last week it was GBP. The impression is that this is your content or you own it, but not really. It's mostly about the platform. And this is just an illustration of how if you invest a lot in a single platform and then the platform degrades or dies, or there's some capricious decision for monetization reasons, it screws everything up. And, there doesn't seem to be any way around that right now. I mean, open source or, some sort of community-based thing, perhaps, but not really. So we're at the mercy of these, and LinkedIn, LinkedIn is sort of looming in the background, right? So LinkedIn was the other one that I think had an opportunity, but sort of dropped the ball because they needed to create a sort of a separate experience for a Twitter-like thread. And that was probably something they discussed internally, but disregarded because it would be disruptive of their current user experience. But that's
to Mike's point. To Mike's point on LinkedIn, though, I mean, what they really need is a tweet deck for LinkedIn, because the single stream is just absolute garbage.
It's incoherent.
Zero utility. So.
Well, and if you miss something, I mean, this is true for Twitter as well. I mean, you could save stuff on LinkedIn, but I mean, there's a lot of garbage on LinkedIn, but there's a lot of good stuff too. And I don't have time to read it. And there's really you can save it, but there's really no way to capture that and go back to it when you have time. So anyway, and now speaking of confusion and vagueness, the FTC issued a new anti-fake reviews guidance, guide, and rule. And, a lot of people haven't focused on it, but it's kind of both significant and potentially problematic. So, Mike, why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. So first you have to understand what there is. It's a proposed rule. It's a preliminary rule. It's not finalized. So right. The difference between a guideline and a rule is a rule gives the Supreme Court decided that the FTC could not impose fines under guidelines. It didn't have the authority without the adjudication of a court. So guidelines became a less powerful enforcement mechanism because they could no longer impose fines when they had judged somebody doing something wrong without going through a court. So, but with a rule is it can incur a civil penalty if it is violated. It's more like a law. With a guideline, you have to prove that they knew they were violating it, which is very difficult. You also, sometimes you even have to educate the users, the business that's violating it. So a lot of times they have a second bite at the apple. Whereas with a rule, if a rule is violated, it's everybody's responsibility to know what the rules are and to follow them. So there's a difference in a guideline and a rule. And so the guideline that they proposed this time is an update to the endorsements, testimonials, and review guidelines. Now they finally sort of acknowledge the existence of reviews in these guidelines. The big issues, the big sort of concepts here, disclosure of any incentive or material relationship has to be
conflict of interest. Any
conflict of interest, no matter how small, unless it's pennies, has to be disclosed. Disclosures must be obvious and if you're
clear and conspicuous, right?
And in the mediums that you are using. If you're using both voice and video, for example, it has to be available in both. Or if you're using voice and video and text, it's got to be available in all three places. You can't just put it in one spot. You can't put it in a thread comment on a YouTube, for example. You have to put it in the YouTube. If you're doing a podcast, you put it in the podcast and whatever. And then, you can't talk about an experience. They made explicit. You can't talk about an experience or a product if you haven't tried it. You can't endorse it. If you've only tried it once, you can't suggest you use it regularly. If you thought the product was terrible and mediocre, you can't say it was good or terrific. You can't misrepresent your opinion in your experience in any way. They did make some interesting FAQ sort of explanations. They made it clear that if you donate to a charity as an incentive for review, that has to be disclosed in the review, which means it's against Google's guidelines because it can't be disclosed in the review. If it is, it gets taken out because it's against Google's guidelines. So basically, if you donate to a charity on almost any to get a review, it's against most terms of services, and thus because you can't do the disclosure. If you have friends or family, review you or a new service, they have to disclose that. They did make clear that review groups, friends of lawyers, for example, review each other, even if they use each other's services, are only legitimate if there's disclosure. And again, there can't be disclosure at Google. Therefore, review groups are out. They did say that, and they made explicit in the guidelines that you can't gate, which we've known about. And then the interesting one that came up was, if you delay negative reviews to deal with them, you have to delay positive reviews by an equal amount. Not a big deal, but if you're going to take a week or 2 weeks to fix negative reviews, you have to delay all reviews an equal amount. But in the guideline, they also have a section on contacting customers who left negative reviews and trying to make them happy. If I succeed, can I ask them to change their reviews? This is the guideline. So you're welcome to contact unhappy customers. However, asking them to change or delete their initial negative review could mislead readers. So that's the guideline. Now, the same thing, when addressed in the rule at the request of the NADA, which is the National Association of Auto Dealers, they say that it wouldn't ever prohibit you, and that it's okay if you ask them to change reviews. So there's a conflict on that point, that they say that, as long as you can't force them to change their review, it's
the thing I would say on that is, like, wouldn't it be equally misleading to readers if the business resolved something in a positive manner and the negative review was still up there? Like, if the customer ended up having a good experience, the negative review is just as misleading. So
right, I don't know what they're expecting with that, and it's contrary to what they say in the rule. The rule wouldn't prohibit such conduct, assuming that reviewers are not required to remove or change their reviews. In other words, it's perfectly legitimate under the rule to contact them, make them whole, and ask them to change it. That's totally legitimate under the rule. But if they change it or delete the initial negative reviews, that's misleading under the guidelines. So that's kind of weird.
Yeah, there's a bunch of sort of confusing and vague things in there. But one thing that strikes me, I want to say this before I lose it out of my brain, is that the best practice in this new scenario would be you delay publication of all your reviews, right, by a week or 10 days or whatever the time frame is. So you're treating them equally. The positive reviews just sit in the queue. The negative reviews, you approach all the customers and you say, I'm sorry you had a bad experience. What can we do to make it better? You make it better. And then you say, if you are happy, can you update your review using the magic language or whatever? And they do. And it's a kind of stealth review gating, right? It's legit. It's
business. It's best business practice, though. So
right. But I mean, it's a sneaky review gating thing, but it is also what reviews should be doing, which is alerting businesses to problems in their product or service that they then address. Right. That is the one of the primary functions of reviews, if people are doing it correctly, is that they're getting feedback, they're responding to that feedback, and hopefully they're making their customers whole or remedying whatever the problem is. So it works conceptually at that level, but I'm just pointing out a kind of irony that there's a stealth review gating thing here if you hold back all these reviews, right? So instead of routing positive reviews immediately to whatever site and holding back negative reviews and trying to address the problem, in a kind of good faith scenario, you could still do that under this kind of thing, if that made any sense. I don't know if it did.
Right. Yeah, it does. And to me, that would make sense as a review platform.
That's what you should do if you're a business.
Right. If you're a business and a review platform, that's a service you should offer. The question I have for review platforms is, should they offer historical tracking of reviews? Should they show the original and just
drafts,
show a historical view?
Versions.
Here's the versions, right? Or not. I don't know. So on to the rule. So the proposed rule is a legal document, 100 pages long, where they have
Which no one is going to read. No one is going to read that except for you, Mike.
What? What do you mean no one? I read it. What do you think I did over the 4th of July?
The entire internet.
Everyone should have done. I mean, what else do you do on 4th of July weekend but read a 100-page legalese FTC document?
Hot dog in one hand, document in the other.
for my family, it was a pork sandwich. We roasted whole pork. We had 60 guests over. We had a bang up time. Anyways, this rule allows them to fine violators without court proceedings or without, them getting a second bite to make it right, second chance to make it right. So in this, they make it clear that, one, it doesn't apply to platforms. It only applies to brokers and businesses. So it's against this rule to sell fake reviews. It's against the rules for insiders in a company to mandate reviews of their employees. If an employee were to leave a review inadvertently, that's not against the rule. It's not correct. It's not a legitimate rule under not a legitimate review under the guideline, but it's not against the rules. Purchasing reviews from fake users or non-users of a company product against the rules. Company-controlled review websites purporting to be independent is against the rule. In other words, company A can't have a review website that talks about how great they are if it looks like it's independent. Review suppression of any form, verbal, legal, or moderation-based, is against the rules.
That's intimidation? That's intimidation?
Yes, intimidation, verbal or legal threats or contracts, or moderation where you suppress it and you let the positive.
How does that impact the allegedly defamatory? Occasionally you have these defamation cases with some.
Well, they do provide a whole number of reasons that you can take a review down. They make those explicit,
including defamation.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a legal conclusion. It's not a self-evident thing very often.
And then misuse of fake indicators of social media influence. If you've bought followers with the intention of making you look more prominent than you are to sell goods or services, that's against the rule. And the selling of those fake indicators is against the rule.
Well, so that's a pretty significant thing. This is a digression, but the idea that there's a lot of firms that will sell followers, and the purpose of that indirectly is to sell stuff to make money, right? In most cases, but that's an interesting topic unto itself. Does that automatically make you vulnerable to some sort of civil penalty under this rule?
Assuming they have enforcement capacity, but
that's really the issue in a certain way.
Right.
But keep going.
So, anyways,
thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.